I hope you enjoy this tour of the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm here with my mom, who went through World War II. My dad was in service. They didn't meet until after the war, so she didn't know him ahead of time. But you know a lot of people who went through the war, and then you went through all the deprivations here at home through that time.
Coupons
and all the shortages and the metal drives and everything like that.
Yeah.
So
that was a big thing.
Quite a time. And we had a number of family members, and so did Debbie. I had an uncle who served in the Navy. I had another uncle, my dad's brother, who was a mechanic in the Air Force. Dad was in the Army. And then my wife Debbie's uncle, Bill Day, was a bomber pilot over Germany. I'll tell you a little bit about him later. The museum is divided into roughly two portions. One concerns the war in Europe, the other, the war in the Pacific. We're going to head into the war in Europe. Debbie's uncle was a bomber pilot over Germany. He didn't tell a whole lot about his experiences over there. I'm sure they were quite horrific, but I did get to sit and talk with him once when he was still alive. He said that of his graduating class of pilots, only 3 of them lived to return home to the United States. So I asked him, well, how many were in your class? He told me 2,000.
Oh, no. No kidding.
Randy here travels with Debbie and Randy. We're at the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and I was thrilled when we walked in. The first thing I saw was this motorcycle, which is exactly like what my dad rode in World War II. He was an MP. He would lead convoys. He was stationed in Naples, Italy for a time. And when the war in Europe ended, he was put on a troop ship and was sent to the Pacific Theater, where, as he says it, fortunately the Pacific War ended before he got there. He was okay with that. But this is the type of motorcycle he rode. I've got pictures of him and his buddies with their line of motorcycles. So it's really cool to see that one in real life.
Well-skilled German fighter pilots attack head-on with suicidal courage. By 1943, the average life expectancy of a crew member is only 7 missions. As the body count soars, crew morale is great. The B-17 bombers are fat targets for the Luftwaffe. 60 B-17s are shot down, 600 men killed or captured. The losses are not only horrifying, they are unsustainable.
The 8th Air Force bombers take off from England under sparkling blue skies.
Over Germany.
A 20-mile gap opens. Fighters aboard, and they're exposed to German fighters. Spins. Airmen lead from the doomed planes. Some
So having visited the World War II Museum in New Orleans and seen the motorcycle right inside the front foyer, I thought we'd come home and take a look at some pictures. My dad is right here with his motorcycle. He was an MP during World War II. Let's see if we can get it in focus. And that dad was very mechanical. He also got a good conduct medal, so he must have been well behaved and did a good job, which doesn't surprise me. He was always by the book kind of a guy. Here he is in this picture. He's here with the helmet on, but they're working on Jeeps, and he would have been right in there with them. Even though he wasn't officially a mechanic in the war, he was very mechanical. He built cars from the ground up when I was growing up. And then here's his dog tag over here that I have. And interestingly, after we visited the museum in New Orleans, I found among his belongings a souvenir photo from the Audubon Park Zoo in New Orleans. I did not know that he had gone to New Orleans during his years in the service. It must have been on furlough or something. So kind of a nice tie-in to the museum and my dad's service and everything. My favorite hobby growing up was riding motorcycles, and I never even knew my dad rode motorcycles during World War II. Well, he always worked on my motorcycles and upgraded me to bigger ones, faster ones and everything, but he never rode them himself. Well, I found out a little later that not only did he ride motorcycles, but he was leading a convoy one time about 80 miles an hour, and he crashed. And it nearly killed him. He had a deep gouge in his skull, and they said that an 1/8 inch more it would have killed him. Well, he never rode motorcycles the whole time I was growing up, and then by the time I was in college, he got on one, started riding, and after that he and Mom rode all over the country, touring with their motorcycle for years. All the time growing up, I knew my dad had been in World War II, but he never really talked about it much. And I didn't know he even had any memorabilia from the war. But then just a few years before he died, he passed away in 2014, one day he gave me a whole box full of memorabilia from the war. And we actually ended up mounting some of it. I actually have much more than this. We mounted a little bit of it as a memorial to him after he passed away. So this has different medals from the different theaters that he was engaged in and his MP armband and such. But one of the most interesting last stories I have from him is I found this little orange book inside his stuff. And it's a Japanese phrase book. I already told you that after the war in Europe ended, he was being sent to the Pacific Theater. And he had this phrase book so they could learn Japanese phrases while they were on the ship. Well, I noticed the book really looked like it had never been opened. And I asked Dad, how long were you on the ship? And he said, well, at least a couple of weeks. I said, well, your book doesn't even look like it was open. He said, well, I wasn't going to talk to him. That was typical of Dad, a deadpan kind of humor, but it actually had some real meaning because the Japanese never surrendered. And they were in for a horrific time if they had to assault the Japanese mainland. So my dad was very relieved when the war ended before he made it to that theater.